Have you ever devoted a year of your life to a company, building a team from scratch, generating more than half of the company's revenue, only to be fired in a meeting that lasted less than 15 minutes? That's the story of Garrett Walsh. For 15 years, he was the soul of the sales department at a communication systems company. No algorithms, no complicated spreadsheets. Garrett just shook hands, made phone calls, and had dinner with customers. The result? Revenue accounted for 60% of the entire company. But then a new CEO came along. Young, from Silicon Valley, brought with him a vision of total digital transformation. And so people like Garrett, with their life experiences and solid networks, were considered failures at the time. But this is not a story of failure. This is a story about quiet reflection, about faith, and about how a man who was considered out of time created a new wave that changed the entire major publication. You will not only hear a thrilling story, but also learn a profound lesson about career, honor, and the true value of human beings in today's technological world. Please watch until the end, because the best part is what happens after he is fired. The door to the conference room swung open behind him. Garrett Walsh entered, his gray suit failing to conceal the worry that crept into his normally placid features. At the new presentation table, no longer shipping wastewood but cold-tempered glass, 3 people were waiting. At the head of the table was Veronica Bennett, C. To her left was Jason, her personal assistant, a young man, small in stature, clearly uncomfortable with being present. To her right was a middle-aged woman in a high-cut black suit, a representative from Human Resources. Her truth was clear, this was not a strategy meeting. Garrett nodded, keeping his composure, and sat down. "Garrett," Veronica said, her voice steady and emotionless. "First, I want to thank you for your undeniable contributions over the years. Strong. But after taking control of our new direction, we realized that we needed a type of leader who was more aligned with our digital transformation strategy. Modern business models require data, CRM systems, and innovation. We have decided to change your position as regional director." Garrett said nothing. His eyes gently scanned the room. Jason lowered his head to the table, his hands clenched at the edges. The HR woman opened her notebook, preparing to hand him the papers he needed to sign. "I understand," Garrett said softly. He stood up, holding out his hand. "Thanks for being so direct." The handshake between him and Veronica was cold as metal. There were no tears, no arguments, just a man who understood that he no longer belonged here and was ready to go. 15 years packed into one Monday afternoon. Garrett Walsh drove slowly through the familiar streets of Indianapolis. On the side, an old notebook lay open, scribbled with scribbles. Clients' names, their children's birthdays, little notes. Eleanor likes her coffee black, no sugar. Thomas hates being called a client, call her a partner. For Garrett, this was more than a job. It was the art of art, easy to understand. He recalled the early years, when Oaklight was a small firm called Midwestern Literary Partners, with just 2 employees and a rented office on the 2nd floor of an old building. Garrett was the first person Robert Oakenlight hired to run the Midwest business. "We don't need people who are good at numbers," Robert had said in his first interview. "We need someone who can listen." And Garrett did just that. In his first year, he drove more than 70,000 miles. From Ohio to Nebraska, he visited small publishers, shook hands with each book publisher, ate homemade cookies, and listened to their dreams for historical fiction, local poetry, and one-of-a-kind children's books. One of the most special relationships was with Thomas Franklin, the president of Franklin Press. When they first met, Thomas was skeptical of Garrett, but they became friends. Not the kind of LinkedIn friends, but the kind who come to each other's homes for dinner, send flowers when your wife dies, attend your youngest son's birthday. It was that relationship that later led to Garrett landing a $12 million contract. Not because his quote was cheaper, but because Thomas trusted him more than anyone else. No CRM, no chatbot. There are only late-night calls, promises kept, and faithfully built over the years. In Garrett's world, the list is not the product. We are the story. And selling a book means understanding the story behind it, of the writer, the resident, and the reader. It was that gentleness that transformed him from a salesman into the revenue pillar of the entire company. But now, at a time when he is called out of date, the things he built are being classified as not aligned with digital strategy. Garrett is not angry, but he is not forgotten, because his career was not an accident. It was the result of a simple liquidation. If you want others to trust you, you must first live up to that trust. The first time Garrett met Veronica Ben, she had 3 minutes. Veronica wasn't FR, but what she did have. Things started out subtly. Garrett was getting fewer invitations to executive strategy sessions. The reports he usually reviewed were being redirected directly to the company. When he asked, Jason, Veronica's support, would smile politely and say, "We're streamlining communications." However, 3 new hires were assigned to Garrett's team without his input. All were kids, all had Digital Next backgrounds, and none had ever signed a contract in the publishing world. They brought colorful slide decks, CRM tools, and deep industry jargon. But they lacked the one thing Garrett had built his career on: relationships. Garrett observed quietly, like a ship captain watching for new observations. Then came the reason. Clients Garrett had nurtured for more than a decade were suddenly told they had new account managers. There was no warning, no reason to act. One client, Eleanor Jenkins from Riverstone Press, called him in the middle of a storm. "A kid just emailed me saying she was my new contact. It didn't even know we were publishing any kind of list." Garrett took a deep breath and reassured her, though he felt the ground shaking. Behind the scenes, Garrett nodded. The worst kind. Veronica laughed hard. And as he realized that, a question began to form in his mind. Not if they would get him out, but when. The office was quiet the morning after Garrett was fired. The news had not yet been officially announced, but there was no heavy background, as if it had ever. Garrett had not said goodbye. While his team went out to dinner, he had boxed up 15 years of his life in silence. No interim emails. No final expressions issued. Just a steady, almost natural process. But outside, by the time Garrett reached his driveway, he had 3 missed calls. It was 5 o'clock by dinner. The next morning, his inbox was overflowing. Urgent messages, all-caps subject lines, former colleagues, longtime clients, industry friends, all asking the same question, W. The first voice he heard was Thomas Franklin's. Next, "Not enough filters." "Garrett, what?" Garrett tried to keep his tone neutral as he responded. There was a pause on the line. Then venom. "Do they understand your O?" It wasn't just words. Within days, the damage had begun to show. Thomas called back, furious after a meeting with the new account. "This kid talked to me for 40 minutes about data channels and engagement points. He didn't even ask about the mark we're launching next quarter. The mark I told you about is..." Eleanor Jenkins of Riverstone Press wrote back in a chat message, her voice hovering between rage and confusion. "They reassigned me. The new rep mispronounced our name. Wrong." Other customers reported the same thing. Naturally, the most successful central accounts responded to the email. "What is Oaklight?" Jacob, now awkwardly occupying Garrett's old position, quietly called him late one night. "They're out of control. CRM isn't working. Reps are drowning. And the older team members? They're angry. 3 people have quit this week. But Garrett D. One night, he sat in his office with a notebook open on his desk. This time, instead of planning sales strategy, he was counting the calls, customers, partners, vendors, that had reached out to say hello. Garrett didn't sleep much the first few nights after leaving Oaklight. Not out of regret, he didn't feel anything, but out of the silence after the storm. The calls had slowed, but the questions remained. Now what? What could he do logically? He needed answers. An FA. That's why, 3 days after leaving, he found himself sitting in a cramped office filled with thick law books, across from Benjamin. His long, "Here, Benj." He read Sill. Garrett tilted. It means they tried their best, but in doing so, they made the chain too tight to hold. Banned from working with anyone related for a year in the industry relationships, your knowledge. Garrett way out one. "Yes," Benjamin said. Garrett nodded, thinking. What if I don't contact anyone? What if I just exist? Make myself a should? Benjamin laughed. Now the street. That night, Garrett waited quietly for the Walls file. This 3. Where? Unofficially. Good. Garrett paused. It was a generous offer. It was like walking a tightrope. But Benjamin was clear. He couldn't get to Oaklight's customers. But they could get to him. He was accepted. Garrett didn't want to pay. He didn't want war. What he wanted, what he'd always wanted, was to help publishers succeed on their own terms. But if Oaklight thought they'd buried him with a severance check and a contract, they had something else lined up. You can't break trust. You can't ignore loyalty. And Garrett Walsh wasn't going to go quietly. Inside the newly renovated Oaklight facility, the sleek glass walls and modern workstations do little to hide the cracks forming beneath the surface. 3 weeks have passed since Garrett was fired. Outside, the company is making a Jacob, Garrett's former support. One evening, he calls Garrett, his voice low and hesitant. Really bad, he says, without any business consequences. They've turned all your major accounts over to the digital team. CRM is mandatory now. Most of the clients are furious, Jacob adds. Riverstone is going to walk away. Franklin Press hasn't returned any calls in a week. And those who expect Garrett, they are really harsh. Yet Veronica still did not make any moves. At every internal competition, she considered the blood color to be transitional fluctuation. She insisted that this was expected, necessary, but few people. Worse, Garrett had become a ghost story in the hallways. Lawyers had begun to monitor his activities. Rumors spread that an event was being prepared. Jacob knew he was bluffing when he made the call. Before the line went silent, he whispered. Garrett said nothing at first. Then finally, good, because fear-pain is not the enemy of power. It is the first sign that someone realizes they have made a mistake. Garrett didn't strike with a bang. He struck with silence and no big announcement, no report, just a modest LLC filing under the name Walsh 1. By the end of the first week, the publishers had moved on. By the end of the second inning, it was 12 o'clock. They didn't ask what services he offered. They didn't need a referral. They just asked, "How can I help you?" Thomas Franklin was the first to sign on officially, not as a client but as a partner. The consortium is not a company. It's a movement, a coalition of independent publishers tired of being the biggest infrastructure companies, tired of their deterministic mathematical values. Garrett introduced a second finishing flaw: connectivity. Within a month, he moved into a small office in Broad Ripple, a stone's throw from the swanky downtown tower of Oaklight. He brought in 2 staffers, a bright college grad to handle communications and a retired publishing veteran named Ruth to manage operations. Just until this thing gets done, she said. But she was smiling. She would know. Garrett didn't chase clients. He didn't sell promises. He just solved problems and spread the word. The consortium structure was simple. No deadlines, no high fees. The Publishers Weekly ran a spotlight theme, R. Street 1. Inside Oaklig, customers don't just leave, they leave together. It's the consolidation around Garrett. And he didn't. One night, Garrett laughed. He didn't. He had something they no longer had, trust. And that was more valuable than any CRM, any new rebrand, or any consultant-delivered vision. The league isn't just in the business of growing. It's in the business of rewriting the rules. The Oaklight Press showroom was eerily quiet. No one was returning to the front. No one was checking their phones. A pinkish-red icon hovered over the screen behind Veronica Bennett, a visual status report on every girl who had promised. Revenue, vote. No one said it, but everyone was thinking the same thing. This is not a turb. Veronica stood in the front, her voice strained but numb. This downturn was predicted, she insisted. Disruption comes with limitations. We're rebuilding. Meanwhile, Garrett Walsh sat across town, not in a suit, not in a showroom, but at a communal table inside a renovated warehouse that now houses WA, surrounded by He didn't watch the Oaklight call. He didn't need to. His phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Fra. You fixed the school. Never mentioned your name again. Garrett smiled weakly. It was Veronica's style, denying the core of the matter, and that afternoon his phone rang again. He chose. Garrett, the voice said. Shadowy, tense. It was V. There was a pulse. Garrett leaned back, watching the animated chatter running through the room. His people, his purpose. The consortium was no longer an idea, it was a success. I have. That's the only thing that matters, Garrett replied. They didn't leave because I started something new. They left because Oaklight kept on honoring what mattered to them. What I gave them. Veronica's voice faltered. I've be. The machine finally. A month later, the Walsh Publishing Consortium expanded to Overacro. Garrett didn't need to be in a tower. He didn't need a sign. He just needed trust. And he had a lot of it. In business, metrics matter. Technology is powerful. But relationships, they're irreplaceable. Garrett Walsh's story isn't just about wrongful termination. It's about what gets lost when companies chase the next big thing and forget the timeless value of human connection. He didn't retaliate with lawsuits or sabotage. He simply did what he'd always done, served people with integrity. The Walsh Publishing Consortium wasn't built on ambition. It was built on a mission to restore trust, transparency, and collaboration in an industry that desperately needed it. Today, Garrett works from a desk among his team, not a corner office. There's no corporate hierarchy, just a shared purpose. Getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because it led to revenge, but because it pushed him to create something more honest, more agile, and more human than what he left behind. And that's a lesson for all of us. In a world obsessed with efficiency, never underestimate the power of authenticity. Because at the end of the day, people don't follow systems. They follow people they trust.